Welcome back to Earth Station Trek, a show where we trek from the early days on NBC to the future on Paramount Plus and everywhere in between. I'm Charles Kelso, and it's my privilege to introduce the Earth Station Trek crew, Keith Johnson.
1 year closer to World War III.
And Veronica Dashel.
1 year closer to the Vulcans.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're 1 year closer to something. This is our first episode of 2025.
Woo!
Yeah, and as we like to do, we're going to be looking back at all of the Star Trek episodes that came out in 2024, naming off our favorites, sort of ranking them, and then doing the tabulations at the end. We assign point values to our rankings, and seeing what our master list is of the official Earth Station Trek Best Trek of 2024 is. So it should be pretty exciting. We had a big year for Star Trek this year with 40 episodes.
Yeah.
3 very probably final seasons of shows, several for sure, and one we have some hope in our hearts, but it's not looking great. So quite probably 3 series finales this year as well, which is it's a bittersweet year to have this much Star Trek, but this much sort of things coming to an end. But first, Keith, we haven't seen you in a few weeks. You've been doing some traveling through the holidays.
Yeah. Back home in Texas for Christmas to see family and so forth.
Yeah, so let's play a little catch up. What have you thought about? We talked while you were gone. We talked about the finale of Star Trek Lower Decks, and then we had the Swevens on and talked about Star Trek: The Next Generation season 4.
Yeah, Lower Decks was actually everything I wanted. It was, and this is what I think about Lower Decks. It was both less than I wanted and just as much as I wanted. And of course, by that, it's only a 30-minute show officially, and so they couldn't draw it out that true finale as much as maybe I wanted. But I think they have a very good way. Those people have just, they're masters at doing what they do, comedy and really good, tight episodes. That was literally one of the most fast-paced episodes of Trek I've ever seen, period. Right. I mean, my gosh, it was battles and ships. The stuff, the action on screen was moving as fast as they talk. They all talk they all talk like this. They talk like an old film noir or a comedy from the 40s. It was beautiful. It was gorgeous. And we had talked about this a lot, which is you did not expect a cartoon, call it what we call in America, a cartoon to have this much growth. And the characters grew. We've all talked about that. How amazing. I remember saying from the first season, I was like, I don't know if Mariner's kind of sort of going to get on my nerves because the thumbing her nose at authority shtick was going to get a little old for me. But she grew and they all grew. And I like the fact that the captain got a promotion. Ransom is now a captain, and well, he's Ransom, so
Yeah.
I loved it, and I just like the fact that they all you just know they're all going to grow, and it was both, like you said, Charles. It was both kind of the end of like an episode, so you just know they're going on, but it could also be a great series finale. It was both. If that's all we get, it's great, but we can definitely do more with those characters.
Absolutely. And then what about Star Trek: The Next Generation season 4? Have you ever seen that?
Oh, just a few times. I really hated missing that one because, especially, it's so cool with Elaine going through this for the first time. Because as we all know, the thing became that Star Trek hit its other than the original series, Star Trek hit its best stride in season 3. That was a thing for a minute, and I think Strange New Worlds is probably up into that as well. But definitely TNG really came into its own in season 3. And then I was looking at season 3 and season 4, and I'm not going to spoil Elaine, season 5, but just some of the best episodes in Trek in probably the 3, 4, and 5. Because you look at it, season 4, of course, there's the best of both worlds, the finale, which I like. I don't like how the Borg were taken out. That's a personal thing. You turn off a computer, basically it overheats and blows up. But one thing I was looking at in season 4, and I think where they really started establishing themselves as unique and also hailing back to the original series is there's a lot of action in season 4, but it's mostly truly drama. Family, one of my favorite episodes of all time in Star Trek, where Picard goes home and has to break down with his brother. That's the correct one, right? The first time in Star Trek history that a main captain cried who wasn't being affected or mind controlled by someone. I'm not talking about the captains and commodores who went crazy throughout the series,
right?
But a captain who's our main hero who cries on screen never happened before.
Right.
Back then, that was a big deal. I love that. But there was just so many episodes. Remember Me with Beverly, with the time bubble thing, and Reunion's another good one. I mean, there's just they really came into their own with the music and the writing and the characters. I even like Clues, which is the one where they go through it's the one they go through the wormhole, right? Uh,
Yeah, then they're you talking about when their memories are erased?
yeah, it's just a fun episode. Even if again that's another weird. But I think when Elaine and Matt had reviewed that one, I had written, and I firmly believe this. Do you honestly think on a ship of 1,000 people, everybody's gonna go, oh yeah, yeah, you can wipe my memory, dude? I'd have notepads and my phone and my tablet, and I'd be recording this stuff, and then the next day I'd be like, hey Keith, you're not gonna believe what happened. There's no way I'd let that go, but it's still a fun episode. It's just and of course Half a Life, one of the considered one of the best ones of the series. So I think it's just with almost without fail, it's just an excellently written season. I can watch that. There's not one episode there that I said, I don't want to watch that again. It's just a great season.
Okay, yeah. Well, speaking of great seasons, we had a big one this year. Before we get into it, we had a comment from Mr. Matt Swebin that says,
Hey,
Happy
Matt.
New Year. More trekking in 2025.
Yay.
And we're looking forward to it.
Indeed.
So we're going to go through and just rank the episodes, give our top fives. We'll count up from our number fives up to our number ones, and then give some honorable mentions. And then, we'll have our tabulation of our master list of the best episodes of 2024. So I guess I'll kick it off with Star Trek Prodigy, The Devourer of All Things, as my number 5 episode of the year. And I'm counting the two-parter as one. Mm-hmm. And this is the one where they go to the planet with the space ziggurat, and Wesley Crusher comes popping out. And it's a little bit of a different Wesley Crusher than we've ever seen before. It's I thought they did a phenomenal job we've seen so many legacy characters brought back on these new shows.
Right.
Sometimes it works. Sometimes it's just seems like a gimmick. But I thought with Wesley Crusher, they did a fantastic job of making him feel like a grown-up version of the Wesley Crusher on the show. They sort of leaned into his nerdiness and his genius from the show in a different way. But also they took into account all the stuff that was thrown out in Star Trek Picard's, not thrown out, but thrown out on screen on Star Trek Picard season 2, where you have the Gary Seven style supervisor and time manipulations and stuff going on, and then they tied Wesley in and his little cameo in the end that like, oh no, the Travelers are part of this too, which had never been the case before. But then they just took that and ran with it on Prodigy in a way that I thought worked really well. And it's saying something when a legacy character comes back, and I like them more after they've come back. And it feels like one that was unfinished business from Star Trek The Next Generation, because the way Wesley exited the show and then the way his final exit occurred, and it sort of just left you hanging, right? And I mean, all these years you kind of wondered like what happened to Wesley Crusher, and now we find out in a way that I thought was extremely satisfying, and it makes the character better all the way around. But along the way, you also had Action Janeway in her gray tank top fighting the Loom, who were cool and erasing people from history. And then is it Commander Tysus, the Andorian first officer of the Voyager A?
That's right.
Yeah,
had that great away mission where his guy gets like deleted from history, and he beams back up and he's like, whatever happened to Ensign so-and-so? And they're like, who are you talking about? And it's just really cool, chilling stuff. I thought all the way around, I thought it was a really fun episode.
It really was, and I agree with what you're saying about Wesley, because I remember that Wesley's last appearance on TNG was when he was going away with the Traveler, and they wrote this really lame line for Beverly where she says something like, wear something warm in whatever dimension you're going to. It was literally one of the stupidest things I think I've ever heard, and I don't really love that episode either. It's a little heavy-handed. I mean, it was noble, but he was fighting for, like there's the thing where like Picard finds out that he was descended from somebody who had done some genocidal stuff in the early United States. It's like, yeah, fine, but you don't need to hold that blood debt like that.
Right.
So, and I agree with you also. In the Picard, they didn't seem to know what to do with Wesley Crike, right? When he came back, he was a little bit over the top. But here, like, you got to get the quirkiness of a character like that. Everybody from him to Doctor Who, the character has to be quirky and nerdy, but also kind of seem like they have, there's somebody to contend with. Yeah, grounded. Somebody to contend with. And I thought they captured it perfectly.
Couple of comments real quick.
Hey.
Irish Banshee 1974 says, I love that Wesley Crusher got to be on Prodigy in this episode.
Agreed.
And Matt Swetman said, I always love Voyager characters as legacy characters in modern Trek, not so much on Voyager.
Oh, Matt,
All
we
right.
could do a show.
Yep. All right. So let's go on to the next one. So Veronica, what is your number 5?
My number 5. Hold on. I have my list.
It's on the screen.
Oh, hey, imposter syndrome. I thought I was gonna have to look at my list. I
Me
know
too.
you're on it right away. So that's the Prodigy episode where they create the duplicates of themselves, and Rock bases the coding of whatever on the doctor's hollow novel.
Mhm.
So they are created so that they can't tell that they're holograms, but then the holograms think that they're the real thing, and then no one's really sure which ones are which, and chaos ensues, and they run around the ship and try and take each other out, and eventually the Rock's just like, let's be friends, we can figure this out, we're friends, because Rock's amazing like that.
It was a fun one.
Yeah.
All right, Keith, ready for your number 5?
Yeah, I think so. If I can remember what it was.
It's also on the screen.
Okay. That's Last Flight of the Protostar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny. Matt just said what I was thinking and why I like this, because this is heavily featuring Chakotay. And we've talked about this many, many times. I think Voyager is a good series because I don't think there's a bad Star Trek series unless you count Picard season 2. And I always loved Chakotay as imagined on the page, but not as executed on that series.
Right.
He goes from being this tough Maquis captain. If you remember one of the episodes when the Maquis was being managed by Tuvok, one of the guys is giving Tuvok guff, and Chakotay goes into the break room, into the galley, and just knocks the guy over and talks about, this is how he used to do it in the Maquis. You never saw that Chakotay much after that.
Right.
He was just Janeway's yes man. And even if he's not going to fight with her, because at some point he's like, we're back to a Starfleet crew, you just didn't feel that Chakotay ever came into his own. And Robert Beltran himself kind of hated the role after a while. I mean, he was really sick of it. And so to see him come back and to give Chakotay something to do, to blend we now know kind of false Okuchi Moya Native American spiritualism that was basically written by a fraud, but bring it into the cartoon and give him some grounding and some spiritual strength with all the pipes and all that weird stuff, it worked. And I, just like with Wesley, I like seeing Chakotay back. Given what his character was supposed to be, I could see him being stranded for all those years, but still, kind of being himself and kind of being fatalistic about it, but then working with them. It's also a really great show with the whole thing, putting the ships in the sky, all the crew working together. And as Matt was also saying, and you were saying, Charles, now you've got Chakotay, you've got Janeway, you've got the new folks. So I just thought it was just wonderful. He's a character I never felt got his due in live action, and I'm glad he got it in animation.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's grab a couple of comments real quick. Tiger Blade 2002 says, "Hey y'all, happy New Year."
Anyway,
What's up?
And then Matt Sweatman said, "Imposter syndrome could work as a Lower Decks plot."
I can see that.
Yeah.
Now, Alan couldn't be with us tonight. He had band practice. He's got a big gig coming up. But
The comment's still on the screen.
oh, I'm so sorry. I'm juggling multiple screens here, folks.
Yeah.
But he sent me his ranking and some comments along the way as well. Now, Alan's number 5 was Dos Cerritos. And he commented, Tendi gets the start of a nice side hustle story arc, and the Cerritos gang gets insights into how different their lives could be. Yeah, and I really enjoyed that one as well.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and I think when we reviewed it, we talked about the fact that it actually kind of upended your expectations because we're so programmed to think about pure mirror universe episodes where we're thinking nefarious purposes, and it really wasn't that. So, then of course the beard, they were messing with us, and it turned out not to be that. It really kind of, other than the Captain Freeman, kind of, sort of, but it really just turned out to be more along the lines of if you took a left instead of a right in your life. And not like, oh, I'm just going to take over the universe and I'm your evil twin. So I loved it for that.
And while it all was going on, you had the Blue Orions and the further fleshing of the Orion culture, which I really enjoyed these first 2 episodes.
That's great.
All right, on to my number 4, which is A Farewell to Farms from Lower Decks. And I thought this was just a wonderfully executed episode. It's one of those Lower Decks episodes that shifts the perspective. And so it's really from the perspective of the Klingon guest characters, which I love it when they do that. They even change the intro and everything. But we got to see life on just a farm, a Klingon farm, which we'd not seen before. We got to see where blood wine comes from, but also we got to see Mock come back and his brother Malor. And I love that that Mariner and Boimler like drop into their story, and then it continues on, and it feels very much like a TNG or DS9 Klingon story where they're going to the council and they're taking advantage of the different, ancient rituals and things, and it's almost like it's legally binding stuff because it's just ancient rituals, so they have to follow it because they're the Klingons. Yeah. And I love Boimler, who usually is not a brave character, but he's such a geek over the Klingon stuff that he's excited to get hit by pain sticks, and he's excited to be in the rituals, and they're like, we must sacrifice someone, and he's like, ooh, I'll do it, and she's like, no, you won't. Which is such a counterpoint too to the way that O'Brien and Bashir responded to the Klingon rituals in Looking for Parmok and All the Wrong, or no, in You're Cordially Invited. It was such a fun episode, and I thought it really fleshed out the world of Lower Decks, and it really was just a great Star Trek episode. And I'm always a sucker for a Klingon episode.
So am I. And it's funny, I hear so many people are tired of Klingon episodes. I see that all the time, but yeah, I like them too. They also, again, they even the voices, right? They kind of do the gruff. All the Klingons have gruff voices. I mean, I love to hear like 10-year-old Klingons. They probably have a deeper voice than I have now. So it's all fun.
You even had a small role for Mary Chieffo as a Klingon, which is nice to have back in the Trek. All right. Comment from Matt Sweatman. He said it was fun seeing Klingons outside of the military.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. All right. Where are we going next to? Veronica?
Yeah.
All right. Veronica, what's your number 4?
My number 4 is Dos Cerritos, which we already talked about a little bit. But I really enjoyed seeing the alternate versions of people, and I really enjoyed the Mariner that went like hard left, leaning into Starfleet, and then realized, oh wait, I actually don't like this. I want to lean away from Starfleet. I'm going to take over. Hee hee hee. So that was fun.
Yeah, and one other quick comment I have on that too with the Dos Cerritos. There was a Facebook post I think I did a while back, and it was that whole if you took a red pill or blue pill meme, would you want to live your life over? And it was very interesting because I would tend to think I'm a wise person. I think I was like the only person of a whole bunch of people who'd say I would go back like 20 or 30 years and change my life. And everybody else is like, no, I wouldn't do that. So, and maybe as I get closer to the end than I am from the beginning, shows like that actually, they resonate with me because again, there's those choices. Like, would I have done this versus this? And then you make those comments, you think about like, because Matt Sweatman even said, well, if I did this, I wouldn't have met Elaine. So then I'm hedging my bets. I'm like, no, see, I want to do this. And I want to have a different career and to be a different person, but I still want to keep my wife. I want to keep Phil. It's like I'm going to somehow make it where I still meet her, but everything else changes. So it's fun watching that other ship.
Right. We had a comment about the previous episode from Irish Banshee 1974 that says, until A Farewell to Farms, I never really thought about civilian Klingons.
That's the problem with monoculture presentations.
Absolutely. All right, Keith, let's go to your number 4.
Eriga. How do you actually pronounce that?
I think it's just Eriga.
It's Eriga. Yeah, this is from Discovery. And this is when the brief description on Amazon or IMDb talks about Maul and Locker in custody. The Breen show up and are demanding to know what's going on, demanding retribution for people violating their space and their principles and their laws. And this is a funny one because when I wrote in my notes, I wrote Breen, who I love because they were such a cool, mysterious race. And I was so excited to see the Breen finally shown. As you guys remember, when we talked about this, and I was so disappointed when the Breen were finally shown. But the reason I still put this on here, because you remember that huge, giant, basically city ship, battleship, Breen ship showed up, and they were so tough, and they were still doing a voice, and I was like, the Breen. And so I remember the excitement I had when the Breen were finally going to be fleshed out. Right. And then I remember how disappointed I had when the Breen kind of ended up looking like chumps, and then the whole jelly face, it was horrible. But I still remember it's like when you meet somebody, you're younger, you meet that person you think is going to be your great love, and you go out and like up a couple times, like, wow, that was a bad relationship. But the first time you saw him, it was beautiful. So this is my memory of the Breen before we dated.
I grew to like the Breen over the course of that season. They're goofy. but they're goofy in
Yes.
the way that like Klingons are goofy. Like,
Yeah.
the Klingons when they show up on TNG or DS9 or whatever, and they're like, "Ugh," and then you punch them left and right, And the Breen were kind of that way, which was a departure for Discovery.
Yeah.
Like when the Klingons came back on Discovery in season 1, they were like so serious about the
Yeah.
Klingons.
Right.
And I like that the Breen were just kind of like Star Trek goofball aliens.
They really were. Oh, they hurt me so much that when they did that.
All right, let's jump over to Alan's number 4, which was Discovery's episode Whistle Speak. And his commentary was, "A Whistle Speak is a really interesting story that was very much a throwback to earlier Trek. The crew visit a planet, interacts with its people, learns about a whole new culture, but has to be careful about cultural contamination."
Right.
And I enjoyed that one as well. It didn't make my list, but I'm a sucker for Planet of the Week episodes. I love that. I thought that the whistling part was a little half baked, because it was like it was like a detail of their culture that didn't really have much to do with the story. But
Right.
I enjoyed seeing Tilly and Burnham back on a mission together, and I thought that was fun.
Yeah, I think the whistle speak, to your point, Charles. We again talking about Matinee Lane and TNG Darmok. We just had a discussion about Darmok, which is how you speak reflects how your mind works. And so I think they were kind of sort of trying that with whistle speak, but that didn't quite pull that off.
Right.
But it was an interesting effort.
All right, so let's jump to my number 3, which was Discovery's episode Life Itself. Which was the series finale of Star Trek Discovery.
Yeah.
And I thought that this was a phenomenal episode. This one thing Discovery does, I think, better than any other Star Trek series is taking like the big heady sci-fi ideas and then putting them on screen in a grand scale, which oftentimes, like when Star Trek would have a big heady sci-fi idea, they're having to make do with the resources that they have. But Discovery actually has the resources. I mean, a Discovery episode can be more epic visually than even like Star Trek the Motion Picture, which up to now I would say would have been the most visually epic Star Trek, as far as showing science fiction on screen. Discovery does these big ideas and they're able to show it on screen, and I love that. I love the whole like the environment that she was in, the progenitors, thing that they found, the different portals, the different worlds, and then the fight scene that she would have with the bad guy, and they would be like from one planet to another planet jumping through these portals. I thought that was really well done. I love the symmetry of it, that the whole finale is set at this binary black hole, whereas the beginning of Discovery revolved around the battle of the binary stars. I thought that sort of bookends the show really well. And I love that over the course of the battle with the Breen, they found a non-violent way to use the spore drive to sort of banish the Breen, city ship out to like the edge of the galaxy instead of just blowing them up. Because so often it turns into a pew-pew battle until one of them blows up. Right. And I love that they use their wits and they use the technology that's been on the show all this time, but did it in a different way, and use the science to resolve that battle. I loved that. I loved having Saru back. We saw too little of him over the course of the season. And I even really liked the tag that they added, because it really focused on Burnham, but Discovery really focuses on Burnham. And something that's been really part of her character since the beginning was that she was an orphan. She had contentious, complicated relationships with the various paternal and maternal figures, whether it be Sarek or Amanda or her biological mother coming back from the future and the past. It was nice to see her with a nice home and a family and a legacy of her own. And so she made it. Like, she found the place where she belongs. Because for so long, like Starfleet was for a while the place where she belonged, and then it wasn't. She became an outsider even within Starfleet, and that's sort of a battle that she had her whole life. And I love that they brought that around full circle. And I really liked at the end they left it very vague, but the tie-in with Calypso, where they, for a mission unknown and reasons unknown, they restore the Discovery to the classic configuration from the early seasons. Right. And so you see at the end of the show ends with like the classic Discovery leaving, to a Starfleet honor guard of 32nd century ships, or I guess 33rd century ships by this point, as the ship itself heads off for other adventures and whatever else is going to happen out and amongst the stars. And I thought that was a really good end for Discovery, given sort of the history of that show. I just thought that the whole thing was really well done. I really enjoyed the progenitors themselves. I love the reveal that they didn't even create this stuff. They found it, which increases the scope of the Star Trek universe.
Yeah.
By a lot, because this is the progenitors up to this point were like the 4 billion years ago, they sort of seeded life in the universe. And then they're like, oh no, we didn't create all this. We found it. It was already here. And it was like, wow, like how far back does this universe go? And I love that the whole, I mean, if you're going to pull something from classic, like our legacy Trek to build upon, I thought the progenitors was a really good one, because it's part and parcel of what Star Trek is, that you have this diversity amongst the different species, but they're all basically humans. I mean, you have some that are not, but for like 99% of them are just humans with weird shapes on their faces and so forth.
Right.
But I love that the progenitors thing sort of makes that a part of the Star Trek story, that there was this race that was just lonely. They were the only race in the galaxy. And so they wanted to create that infinite diversity and infinite combinations that is such a part of the Star Trek message. And they did it. And that's what Star Trek is. That's what we've been watching all this time, is their creations interacting with one another and so forth. So I thought it was, I really loved that finale. It's one of my top, I mean, Star Trek finales. It's not quite up there with All Good Things, but it's up there. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a very well done episode.
I think one thing you said I thought was very interesting when you talk about the whole thing with the progenitors basically they were lonely.
Mhm.
And Star Trek, like the best drama at its best, whether one is religious or not, touches on the themes of religion, because religion, whether one believes in a god or gods or not, is not ultimately about gods. It's about spirituality, which we all have. It's about connection. You look at V'ger. V'ger was basically a god-like being, but to V'ger, we were the creators, and V'ger wanted to touch its god. And so what you're saying is a lot of religion creation myths, whether they're ancient Babylonian or Christian even, will sometimes say that the god or gods are lonely, and they create beings to populate the, not because they want to dominate, but they're lonely. And that thing, like you said, it's a Star Trek thing, connection. Whether it's theological or just metaphysical or spiritual, you want to be connected to something. I've been an amateur astronomer since I was like 7 years old. And I was talking to somebody recently. They're like, oh, you must love math. I'm like, no, I don't love math. At this age, after all these years, I still go out almost every night and I look up at the stars and I just get blown away. And I just get blown away. And it's like, wow. And I feel a connection to it. And to it's so funny. This wasn't even on my list. And I'm like, man, I need to go back and put this on my list, because as you described it, it's so much better than I remembered it, because it worked. And the other thing I was thinking about Michael Burnham, arguably the greatest character arc in all the mainstream captains in Star Trek.
Yeah.
Kirk didn't really change. Archer actually did change a lot in Enterprise. Again, when he went through, Cisco kind of changed. But when you look at Sonequa Martin Green, when she was doing the Vulcan kind of thing, and what she became at the end, which is so much more natural, what a change in that. And she actually got to be happy. She actually got to get married, and which is Star Trek used to not do. So I agree. It's actually really good.
A couple quick comments. Matt Sweatman says, Discovery, through its ups and downs, challenges the viewer's expectations of a Trek show in a way that none have done before. I respect it for that.
Amen.
And Irish Banshee 1974 says, I love the ending that Burnham got in the finale.
Yeah. I agree with Matt, because even if you don't love it, you respect it. And I think that's all you can ask for sometimes.
All right, Veronica, let's go over to your number 3.
Okay. Fully dilated.
Mhm.
I really enjoyed this episode with the purple data head and them on the planet, and T'Lyn just kind of effortlessly growing giant fruits and making amazing hair products that makes their hair shiny and grow really fast. It was just a lot of fun, and watching Tendi flip out and almost go to the dark side, and then Mariner's kind of little journey of discovering that her people are people that go to the brig.
Yeah, I thought that was a good one too.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Keith, what's your number 3?
How do you? Okay, here we go again. How do you? Ooh,
I said it out loud once on the show, and I butchered it.
Aurora Boris.
Yeah, I always want to call
Ouroboros.
it Ouroboros. But you said
It's
maybe
one of those words I've read since I was like 12,
Yeah.
and very rarely have the opportunity to say out loud.
What's that? Yeah, that is. That was just another one where Charles, you had talked earlier about all the different creatures and the beings that they had introduced in Prodigy, and what Prodigy did that surprised me again was it introduced so many different concepts and so many different species and races. And of course, as people may know that term Ouroboros, or however you pronounce it, it's the famous vision of the snake eating its own tail. And it's all about creation and ending, alpha and omega. Is there a beginning and is there an end? Again, we're talking major philosophy, theology, metaphysics about, existence. And then you bring in Wesley, the traveler, and time travel. And you bring in, as you said, the species that was erasing people from existence. And it was much deeper. And I could take much more meaning, I think, out of that than I ever expected when we first saw Prodigy. And I remember saying, oh man, I'm a little I'll enjoy it, but it seems like it's a kiddie Star Wars influence show. And then I watched that episode and I thought about it again today. And there were so many deep concepts. And again, the characters grew. And I think that's what's probably stunning me with a lot of the new Star Trek is how much the characters are actually truly developing and growing across these series. They're not just the exact same character from day one. They truly have an arc. And so I just love it for that. And Star Trek is famous for really cool names, usually Shakespearean or something like that. So I just love that name, especially when I still can't pronounce it.
I'm gonna try again. Ouroboros.
There it is. There you go.
There you go.
Yeah, that'll work. That'll work.
All right, let's go over to Alan's number 3 pick, which was the Prodigy episode, The Devourer of All Things, which also made my list. Now, Alan's commentary was, The Devourer of All Things, a major return for Wesley Crusher in a very fast-paced, timey-wimey episode with really high stakes.
Yes.
Yeah, totally. All right, we want to move on to our number 2s.
Yeah.
All right, we need to take a break yet, you think? Or
yeah, I was concerned about being able to get back to these slides after we
okay. Not a problem. You can insert it wherever you want.
All right. Yeah, let's take a quick break for a promo. And then when we come back, we'll get back to our number 2s and number 1s. So stay right there.
We can't show you what happens in the Felt Nerdy and Dirty show, but we can show you the people responsible. Charles Kelso, Veronica Dashel. Felt Nerdy and Dirty. You won't believe your eyes.
And we're back. All right. So my number 2 episode from Star Trek in 2024 was the Lower Decks episode, Quest. Now we had a little bit of I had to simplify some of the rankings because some of us included Fisher Quest as a 1-parter and some of us as a 2-parter. We try to include 2-parters as a single thing, but not everyone did. So the rankings, I had to sort of combine them. But for me, it was Fisher Quest more so than the finale, because Fisher Quest to me just sort of stands alone. It's a very interesting episode. It's so unexpected. It was like, I mentioned before that like there was so much of an emphasis on legacy characters coming back in these new Star Trek shows. Fisher Quest cranked that up to 11, and you had a show that was essentially, aside from Boimler, who was a transporter duplicate, everyone in the episode is an alternate universe duplicate. And so you have representatives from basically every legacy Star Trek show. You have T'Pol from Enterprise, you have Garrick and Bashir and Curzon Dax from Deep Space Nine. You have Lily Sloan, who appeared in a Next Generation movie. Finally getting her due, because frankly, when you watch that movie, you're left with the impression that she's actually the one who invented warp drive, more so than Zefram Cochrane.
Yeah.
So I love that Lily Sloan finally got her due, and we got Alfred Woodard reprising her role. I love that they got Jolene Blaylock back. I love that we had, only one Voyager character, but we had a lot of that one Voyager character that Harry Kim, Ensign Harry Kim finally made lieutenant and went mad, but you had also like an army of Ensign Harry Kims. And I love the pairing between T'Pol and Curzon Dax. And I mentioned this on our episode of like, it's something I never thought I would see was T'Pol's relationship with Curzon Dax, and they made such a great pair in that episode. So I thought that it was just a really cool episode. It was a really interesting use of the multiverse with a lot of really I thought really on point commentary about multiverses, because multiverses have been taking over pop culture.
Yep.
As it oftentimes, because it seems like people just can't choose a direction, and so you have like a multiverse of characters because they want to do multiple versions of different things.
Or the actors want to play different versions of their character,
or they just want to capitalize on every version of Spider-Man, for instance, or whatever the case may be. But I thought this was a really interesting way to use the multiverse of Star Trek to comment on the larger multiverse like thing that's going on in pop culture, because it seems like every franchise will make it a little while and then like dive into multiverses. But I thought ultimately it was just a really good Star Trek story, because Lily Sloan's character wasn't, the riff she was creating, it wasn't a bad guy trying to destroy the multiverse. They were just explorers. And I thought there was really some good commentary about that. And I just thought it was a really unexpected treat and a really cool episode.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's grab a couple of comments. Tiger Blade 2002 says, your promo was quite affecting. Thank you. And then Matt Sweatman says, Fisher Quest, because T'Pol.
Yes.
And there was no fanfare. All of a sudden, Jolene Blaylock, or I'm sorry, just Jolene now, is back in Star Trek after years of us thinking that she would never return to Star Trek. And all of a sudden, it was just like, hey, here's T'Pol again. And I thought that was just really unexpected. And as someone who doesn't even like Enterprise, I was delighted to see her.
Indeed. Indeed.
All right, Veronica, you want to go into your number 2 episode?
Indeed. Best Exotic Nanite Hotel.
Okay.
This is another one that was just fun. It wasn't like deep or anything, but I really enjoyed Jennifer being back and Mariner being all confused, and the fact that this creature that they were trying to battle was this little teeny tiny version of a ship. It was a lot of fun. And I really enjoyed the name.
Yeah. Have you ever even seen the Best Exotic Marigold Hotel?
I don't think so.
I
knew what it was. I knew what they were referencing.
Yeah, Lower Decks will do that sometimes, where they'll play off a pop culture thing, which isn't unheard of for Star Trek. You had Looking for Parmac in All the Wrong Places back on DS9, but it's not something that Star Trek did a lot of. But I think it's kind of cool that Lower Decks is sort of grabbed that ball and ran with it. All right, Keith, you're on mute. There you go.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that. Emergency. What we got?
You ready to jump into your number 2?
I am. Discovery, Under the Twin Moons. You guys still able to hear me, right?
Yes.
And to discuss a brief synopsis talks about this was Saru's last mission as Captain Burnham's number 1.
Mm-hmm.
And what I find so interesting about this is Doug Jones, to me, is up there with Andy Serkis as a character who plays the wildest characters, and not just in Star Trek, because we know he's done so much in different movies. The way the man moves is just amazing. And somehow the slow grace and elegance that Saru had as an alien character is reflected in and reflects his personality. He's an interesting character. He's kind, he's gentle, he's considerate. I think it's very interesting. Charles, you mentioned he wasn't perfect. That was one of the things. He wasn't great as a captain yet, even though he became a captain. Mm-hmm. And I was just reading a review of Discovery recently from another critic, and they said that one of the greatest natural seeming friendships they've ever seen in all of Star Trek was Burnham and Saru. And, who would have expected that to develop like that? And so I just loved every time he got to be on screen, and I loved his relationship and his marriage. I loved the relationship he had with Burnham. It went from, of course, suspicious of her, the whole thing about when she betrayed her captain, to him becoming a captain, and then him realizing maybe he wasn't quite ready to be captain, then Burnham changing, as again, I'm gonna keep on this theme, from that kind of Vulcan Burnham to a human Burnham, and then they become friends, and he learns to trust her again. It's just really wonderful. And you can really see that he and Sonequa Martin Green, Doug Jones and Sonequa Martin Green, which I've heard about that entire cast, they really liked each other. And you can't fake that kind of chemistry.
Yeah.
It's just beautiful. I just love everything about that with those two.
And I'll throw in too that I really enjoyed the visits to the Promelian planet and the fact that it was Promelians, but also I thought it was a really well realized just environment that they were in.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move on to Alan's number 2 pick, which was Face the Strange from Star Trek Discovery, with his commentary being Face the Strange. I love time scramble types of episodes. This was a really interesting story, and it was the only episode this season that felt like the ship crew were all together, and I found myself really missing that dynamic throughout the entire season.
Interesting point.
I have commentary about that as well, but I'll hold it for a minute, and you'll soon find out why. All right, so you guys ready to get into our number 1 episodes of the year?
Yes, sir.
All right, I'll jump out with mine, which is Face the Strange. No, I think it's a good time to comment on this episode. Face the Strange, it's my favorite Discovery episode. I thought it was just a phenomenal episode, which on the surface, it's not unusual for Star Trek. They're being thrown around in time, right?
Yeah, right.
But the fact that they're jumping around to the different points in Discovery's history, I thought was really effective because Discovery in so many ways feels like the later seasons feel disconnected from the early seasons because you had such a hard reboot between seasons 2 and 3, right? Yeah. Season 5 feels very much like a different show than season 1. Few shows in the Star Trek canon have reinvented themselves as many times as Discovery had. I mean, you can argue that it's almost every season that they've reinvented themselves in some way. But I loved bringing all that together, making the Discovery story feel more cohesive. And this episode really crystallized for me the Rayner storyline with Burnham, being that, we'd established at this point that Rayner, he'd been successful as a captain. He made some bad calls, or what was perceived as being bad calls, whether he thought they were correct or not, got demoted. And now he's in a position where, although Burnham was born many centuries before he was, she's younger and less experienced than he is, but he's having to defer to her and to learn from her. And that's something that I've had to go through in my own life. I don't want to get too personal on the show, but I went through a pretty severe demotion at work about 8 years ago and had to spend 8 years working my way up back into my old position. And along the way, I had to, learn from people and be mentored by people who were younger than I was and less experienced than I was and hadn't been in my industry when I'd been doing it for 15 years, but they were successful and I was not, whether it was fair or unfair. It's something that I went through in my life that was very difficult and something that I had to really power through, but it really crystallized for me that that's really Burnham's story as well. That when we first met her in the first episode of Discovery, they were having the conversation of she and her captain were, George O was saying like, you're ready to get your own command. And then what happened. She made some big decisions that were deemed as being incorrect, got busted down in rank to not even like she was a convict. And then she was on the ship without a rank and worked her way all the way back up to becoming captain. And it's a really inspiring story. I think it really shows what Discovery is about, both on screen and behind the scenes, because Discovery is also a show that just from a production standpoint has had what people would consider failure along the way, that this was working, this was not working. They adapted, they adjusted the show, they kept moving forward. I think that's a really great moral for Star Trek and for a character that, life and progress and success isn't always a straight line. There's a lot of up, a lot of down. There's a lot of wins. There's a lot of losses. You keep moving, you learn, you grow, you change, and eventually you get there. Right. And I think that, this was just a story that meant so much to me just personally, but also it really crystallized for me what Discovery was as a show, what sort of the meta story of Discovery was, in a way that was still a fun action adventure story. Because ultimately they're still punching bad guys, running around on the ship. There's things blasting around, and it's just it's a celebration of Discovery's legacy. Which I keep referencing this because so often these new Star Trek shows are referencing legacy Star Trek stuff, and it turns into what's coming back this week. What's coming back this week?
Right.
And even going through the episodes, like, oh, I like this one because of Data. Oh, I like this one because of T'Pol. You know what I mean? So I love it when, and I've said this on the show before, but when these new shows, they've built their own histories. And so referencing their own histories, because they are Star Trek, that they're the Star Trek references that are all over this episode are Discovery references. And I love it when a Lower Decks or a Discovery gets to that point where they're able to just reference themselves and celebrate their own history instead of just being a new show that celebrates old shows. And I know I thought this was just a phenomenal episode, and it was just a success all the way across the board. And it was easily my favorite episode of the year.
Wow.
Agreed. Something you said, I think that was very interesting when you talked about, you mentioned Rayner, because he was more the crusty, seasoned veteran.
Right.
But what you said, I thought about this, is he could not, because he tried. He tries, he might. He couldn't ultimately look down on the Discovery crew because look, they've been through hell. Seriously, like not only have they been through hell, they've changed timelines. So like, it's one of those I win or hold my beer. Because whatever Raider can say he's been through, it's like, yeah, dude, did you jump through time a millennium and have to start a whole new life again? Did you leave family and friends behind? Did you face, whatever galaxy-threatening things you faced? We did all that crap, and we jumped timelines. So he had to respect them. And it's also, a character like Rayner can be really cliched. And they managed to make him not a cliche. He felt real, because you're going to have somebody like that. And then, as you said, Charles, he's looking at her, and first he's like, yeah, I don't know about these people. Like, the ship's a little too clean. They're a little bit too much by protocol. But then you realize, he realized they're as tough as he is. And your journey and my journey may be different, but doesn't mean that you're better than me. It doesn't mean you've struggled more than they're different. And so and the respect that he finally garnered for her and the crew seemed natural. So I like that about that.
All right. Quick comment from Matt Sweatman. And this is regard to the graphics. So if you're listening to the audio podcast and not seeing the graphics, I put, we have little sort of jokey titles after our job descriptions after our names. And mine was GNDN. And Matt Sweatman says, what is GNDN, Charles? Which GNDN was a gag that the production crew would put on conduits and piping and things on Star Trek. That was a joke abbreviation for goes nowhere, does nothing. So
that's right.
The job I assigned to myself on our little graphics on the L cars was I go nowhere and I do nothing.
That's great.
All right. So, Veronica, are you ready to get into your number one episode of the year?
I'm ready.
Here we go.
The Devourer of all things.
Yeah.
A lot of people had this on their list, but I had it at the top just because it was so much fun, and it was an action-packed episode, and it did bring Wesley back, but it brought him back in a way that expanded upon his character. So it hit my top easily.
Excellent.
It was the first one I thought of.
Yeah, I thought it was a really good episode. I mean, I sort of went on about it before because it was also on Alan's list, but or I think it was also on my list. That's a good one. This one popped up on several lists.
Yes.
All right. Keith, are you ready for your number one?
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah, Lower Decks, like I said before when I was just talking about Lower Decks, it was a really surprising show to me. I had never seen a single episode of the other. Was it Rick and Morty those guys done? Yeah, so I still remember what they did. I've never even seen a single episode of that. The animation was a little weird with the big kind of lazy eyes. I didn't know what to expect. And I just said a few minutes ago, I didn't know if I was going to be able to take Mariner for an entire series with that irreverent attitude, bucking against her mom, doing kind of silly things that you wouldn't do even in kind of comedic things for a Starfleet officer. And the show just grew, and it really caught me off guard how well the show developed and the characters developed. We mentioned earlier that the conclusion, the finale, was just full of lots of action. And it again was both maybe less and more than I expected. Maybe I expected something a little bit more intense and galaxy spanning, even though you can't get much more than alternate realities and all that kind of stuff. But it worked as a 30-minute finale. It worked as a thing that puts a button on the show. If it never comes back, it was a nice ending. If it comes back, you'll feel like you just picked right up where it picked up. And I read an interview with Mike McMahon that he just put out just a couple of days ago, and he said he really, really wants to do more Lower Decks.
Hmm.
And they are pushing to do more. He says, you don't get what you want all the time. If it ends there, they're happy.
Mm.
And if it doesn't, and they come back, he said, we'll pick right up, and it'll, because you can see they've got stories to tell.
Mm.
And so I was just very impressed with it. It was just a nice, fun ride. And it's a show that I can watch again and just love every episode again. So I think kudos to them.
Mhm.
All right, so let's go over to Alan's number one episode of the year, which was also Fisher Quest and the New Next Generation.
Yeah.
His commentary was an amazing action-packed series finale with a huge dose of nostalgia. It wraps up the character arcs of the main cast beautifully without closing off their stories.
Yep.
Leaving it possible to continue them some other time. Not as strong as the season 4 finale, but really close and definitely the best of 2024. And I had to sort of rejigger the rankings just a little bit because Alan had including both of these as number one. You had included the New Next Generation as number one and Fisher Quest as number two, or maybe vice versa. And then I had included Fisher Quest without the other two. So I had to take that into account and like sort of streamline the rankings a little bit because it was interesting how with these serialized shows, like it's easy when they say part one and part two on the screen.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of Fisher Quest and the New Next Generation as a two-parter.
You would or would not?
I would not.
Okay. Okay.
But apparently that's you and me and not Alan and Keith.
Well, yeah, no, Keith had separated them as well. So, but for the purposes of ranking, I yielded to Alan because he had those ranking in first, and so streamlined them. But yeah, I thought that was a really good 1-2 punch from the finale for Lower Decks, and I mean, just we had a lot of strong episodes this year, and it was interesting when Alan sent me his list. He said that one thing that really jumped out to him was how much he really didn't care about Discovery this year, which was funny because when I was putting together my list,
and a lot of Discovery.
I felt like Discovery was the strongest of the three. I felt like both Prodigy and Lower Decks had been better in previous years, and I thought Discovery was firing at all cylinders. So it's interesting to me how I guess it's just because we have these shows are so different from one another that we all sort of take them differently.
Right.
But I mean, what did you guys think about which show really jumped out at you this year? Which one didn't?
I mean, all of them jumped out at me a lot. After hearing you talk about some of the Discovery episodes, I'm like, oh, I should have at least put that on honorable mention. Because I dug through the Discovery episodes and found one for honorable mention, but which was Face the Strange. But listening to you talk about some of them, I'm like, oh yeah, I should have had that on there. And and then I didn't have Fisher Quest or the New Next Generation on my list at all. And it should have been on there. And there was a lot of good episodes.
It was a tough year to try to assemble a list of 5. It was a pretty tough year.
Chuck had 5 honorable mentions.
I did. I had 5 honorable mentions. And it was really getting up to time of show when I had to just decide which ones were honorable mentions and which ones were not. But I think we should go ahead before we, let's do our master list first of our top 10 episodes. Okay. And then we'll have a few minutes to name off our honorable mentions. So I did the tabulations. The way we did it, the same way we did it last year, was, the number 1 choice gets 5 points, the number 5 choice gets 1 point, and then honorable mentions get half a point. So you may see some honorable mentions pop up on this list. But do we want to read it off 10 to 1? Count up to number 1?
Sure.
What do you think?
Sure.
All right. You want to do the numbers, Veronica, and I'll read the titles?
Okay.
Okay, you ready? Start off with number 10.
Number 10.
Ouroboros.
Number 9.
Life Itself.
Number 8.
A Farewell to Farms.
Number 7.
Dos Cerritos.
Number 6.
Under the Twin Moons.
Number 5.
The Best Exotic Nanite Hotel.
Number 4.
Fully Dilated.
Number 3.
The Devourer of All Things.
Number 2.
Face the Strange.
Number 1.
Fisher Quest / The New Next Generation.
Interesting.
That's interesting because wasn't I the only one to do the Best Exotic Nanite Hotel?
But the thing that came up with the ranking was there were so many different episodes that we all had, and it really came down to a 3, because I mean there wasn't 10 episodes that we all thought were the great episodes. We all had such a diversity on our list of different episodes, and so there was a few that crossed over. I mean, the few that crossed over, like Fisher Quest, New Next Generation, Face the Strange, Devourer of All Things, were popping up on several lists. But then after that, you get down to an episode that may have been on one person's list, but they gave it a 4. You know,
Right.
it was just really cool to look at the ranking because we don't compare notes. Like I had all of them because I was doing the tabulations, but no one else had a peek at what everyone else was doing. So, yeah, I mean, I thought it was a really strong year for Star Trek. It was, and the fact that we got 40 episodes this year, it's going to be the last year for the foreseeable future that we have that. I mean, this coming year, we feel confident we're going to get 10 Strange New Worlds and a streaming movie. It's possible we could get Starfleet Academy this year in this calendar year, but we don't know that for sure. So our top 5 next year might be between 10 episodes and a movie.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's been a really great few years of Star Trek. I went back and listened to our 2023 episode as well, just to prep for this and remember what we did. But the last 2 years, it's just been a ton of really fun, interesting, cool Star Trek episodes, and it's been really cool. So we want to name off some honorable mentions before we wrap this up.
Sure.
Like Veronica indicated, I had 5 honorable mentions. I basically did a top 10, and then the top 5 were my top 5. But I had honorable mentions: Fully Dilated, Is There in Beauty No Truth, Labyrinths, which is a really good Discovery episode. I rewatched that just last night, and that's the one where they go to that library archive station.
It's really good.
And it has the funny librarian. It's just a really cool environment for an action adventure story.
Yeah.
I thought that was just a really strong episode.
You gave it a 3.5 instead of a 0.5.
Oh, and then I threw in an honorable mention for a fan film, Farragut Forward, because Farragut Forward is one of, if not the most ambitious Star Trek fan films ever made. It really feels TV quality, or even almost feature film quality, if like an 80s feature film. But they did a phenomenal job with that, so I gave them an honorable mention on my best stuff list. Veronica, did you want to throw out your honorable mentions?
Yeah. So my one Discovery one, as I mentioned, was Face is Strange. And then I basically had one from each series of an honorable mention. Is There in Beauty No Truth, the Prodigy episode where Zero gets their body, and then Shades of Green, that's kind of all about Tendi and the Orions.
Okay. And Keith, you had some honorable mentions?
Yeah, and it's funny. I think all of my honorable mentions were mentioned elsewhere as well, because I think I sent Charles 8, and my number 6 was actually Last Flight of the Protostar, which is a 2-parter. That was a tie, which I mentioned why, because of Chakotay. And then Lower Decks. No, my number 7 was A Farewell to Farms, because as Charles always mentioned, with the Klingons, and I love the brothers, and with so many monocultures, you don't see people outside of whatever, the warrior class or the priest class or whatever. So it was nice to see that. And I always wondered what Mom was like, because all you ever heard was this gruff voice off screen. So I want to meet Mom. And then Face the Strange was my number 8, which is another one that I really enjoy. And honestly, the reason all those 3 were even as low as they were, not that they were quote unquote low, is because I figured the other ones would probably be named by others. So this was one of those where they were all so good that I could rejigger almost all of these and put them in any other kind of order, because it was a strong season, as you said.
Yeah, and if you ask me next year, my ranking might differ slightly.
Yeah. I did one real quick thing. I wonder if y'all thought about it. I asked myself, this is those games you play. If you could only have one thing for the rest of time and the other things get deleted, what would I take? Would I take Prodigy? Would I take Lower Decks? Or would I have take Discovery? Like if 2 of these shows had to be completely deleted from existence and I could only have one, ironically, even though I probably have more high-ranking stuff with Lower Decks, I think I'd keep Discovery. One, because I'm an animation fanatic. I would like the live-action show, and as Charles, some of the things you said, I think Discovery, with all the problems I have, I think Discovery will age better than perhaps it has first hit me. As you get older and you look at sometimes shows are better for what they kind of convey, not what they necessarily say. And I think Discovery will get better with me in time. So that's actually a show I would keep if I had to choose one of the 3 to keep and the other ones went away.
Prodigy.
You would keep Prodigy. The 3, you ditch Lower Decks and keep Prodigy?
No, Lower Decks.
Oh. I was very surprised by that.
Red, no, blue.
Yeah. Matt Sweatman had an interesting comment that said, it's interesting that Discovery and Lower Decks finales were noted, but Prodigy, it was their mid-season finale that was mentioned.
I think what we were all talking about with Prodigy, it was just the way Chakotay was folded in and Janeway was folded in. And then, Charles, you mentioned a lot of good things about Wesley Crusher. So it's not that the finale was bad, but it was the way those characters gelled together toward the finale that I think stuck with me with Prodigy.
Yeah. Agreed.
I think the thing for me with Prodigy that I was a little let down this season because they went so hard into this temporal time shenanigan stuff.
Yeah.
And they leaned so hard into reestablishing the status quo that they had let go of at the end of season 1, where they destroyed the protostar, they destroyed hologram Janeway, and now the kids are heading off into Starfleet and taking that next step. And then they spent all of season 2 getting them back onto the protostar and back with hologram Janeway, which to me just felt like the show heading backwards instead of forwards, where I really would have enjoyed more of them learning to be Starfleet officers rather than immediately betraying all the confidences and stealing ships and never having any real consequences for their actions. I felt like season 1 of Prodigy was stronger than season 2. Not that I hate it. There's a lot that I enjoy in season 2 of Prodigy. But I felt like it was it didn't live up to the promise of season 1 for me personally.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, and I thought that I mean, for one, we actually finished this right on time. But Lower Decks, no surprise, dominated our list.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of strong episodes this year. So, I mean, happy 2025, everybody. We've got a lot of Star Trek. Hopefully, well, we got some Star Trek to look forward to. We won't get 40 episodes this year, but the last 2 years, between the last 2 years, we've had 70 episodes of Star Trek, which has been quite a bit. So we're going to have fewer of those to talk about going forward. But I mean, I'm looking forward to it. There's some interesting Star Trek stuff on the horizon, and I'm grateful that we have what we have, and I'm looking forward to what comes next.
Yeah, and I will tell you, just in our own Facebook group and what I've seen across the thing, dude, the conversations about Section 31, Lord have mercy. People are like, it's gonna suck. It's because I just don't, people are like, it just it shouldn't exist. They shouldn't exist. The conversations are great about this one. I think a whole bunch. Some people may tune in to hate watch it. So I think it's gonna do well.
Yeah, and something I've said a few times now on commenting on various things is it's not the premise that I would be excited for.
Yeah,
I'm not a Mirror Universe guy. I'm not a Section 31 guy, but I'm approaching it with an open mind. I'm hoping for the best because a Star Trek that I enjoy is always better than a Star Trek I don't enjoy.
Agreed.
Yep.
Agree.
All right, Keith, where can people find more of you?
You can find me on Facebook, primarily the ESO Facebook groups. I just drank something. ESO Network Facebook groups, and soon Blue Sky. Is it? Is that what it is?
Blue Sky.
Yeah, I got to go sign up for that and see how many Keith Johnsons already took the slot. So I may end up with something like KBJ123456 or something. We'll find out.
And how about us, Veronica?
Feltnerdy.com.
That's right. And if you're in the Atlanta area, we've got 2 big shows coming up. On January the 7th, we're appearing in Conversations About Love and Kindness, which is a benefit show for PFLAG, which is an LGBTQ charity. So we're performing in that show alongside some really talented performers, but also it's sort of half TED Talk, half performances. It's going to be an interesting show. This coming up January 7th at the Red Light Cafe. And then shortly after that, on January the 12th, we're doing our next big show at the Red Light Cafe. And we're sharing the stage this time with a group called Bean and Bear. And they're a duo who've been active in the Atlanta area for a long time, who we've known for a long time, but we haven't had the opportunity to work with in quite this way before. So we've been working on that the past few shows. We've tried to get them and the schedules weren't quite working out, but this time we got them, and we're going to be on stage together with Bean and Bear with the Red Light Cafe on January the 12th. Those tickets are on sale now. So if you look up, you can look them on Eventbrite. It's Felt Nerdy X Bean and Bear at the Red Light Cafe, or you can follow Felt Nerdy across social media, and I promise we'll be posting about it. Desperately trying to sell tickets so that we can keep doing these shows. So if you're interested in coming to a fun, adult-oriented, comedic, puppetry and magic and burlesque, and we're gonna run the gamut. So come out and see us. And where else can people find us?
Monkeying Around, a podcast about the monkeys.
That's right. We've got some fun shows planned for January. We're doing an interview with a lady who just wrote a book, sort of collecting
interesting writings by Peter Tork from the Monkees, but also we're about to do a crossover episode with the Bat Chums podcast, who are a podcast about Batman, but we're going to be talking about the Monkees episode that introduced the concept of the Monkey Men to the Monkees, which is their superhero parody characters. So we're excited to chat with Bat Chums about that. That'll be coming up in January. So follow us at monkeyingaround.com. And do you have a closing for us this week, Veronica?
Live long and prosper.
Hey, it's not original, but I'll take it. All right, everybody. We go live on Thursday evenings. Come join us. We'll be talking about a legacy Star Trek topic for quite a little bit. And then in a few weeks, we'll have Section 31. And then later in the year, Strange New Worlds. But in the meantime, we'll be talking Legacy Trek. And we'll be coming up with some interesting topics. So we hope to see you Thursday evenings, 8 p.m. Eastern. If not, you can find us on your favorite podcast platform. And bye.